Good morning for the Americas, for Avri and all people who are connecting from United States. Good afternoon for those of you in Europe and Africa, and good evening for our colleagues from Asia. All of us are united in dealing with this major crisis. All of us are affected to some extent by functioning of the internet. We depend more and more on the internet. And we will start today's webinar with one question, which you can see the interface. The question is, to what extent you experience disruption or some sort of changes in the way how internet performs, comparing to the time before the crisis. We'll wait for a few minutes to see what are your responses. But in the meantime, I'll just reflect on the general setting for today's webinar. We are shifting from our on-site physical activities and physical presence towards online activities. And today with our group of prominent experts, whom I will introduce shortly, we'll be discussing ways and means how we can make internet more robust, how internet can basically supply the growing demand for bandwidth, for new application, for services, for online meeting, for online learning. And internet was created initially to be a robust network, to bypass many blockages, but this type of challenge and this type of test is probably the first major test in the history of the internet when it comes to the load. Today with us we'll have really eminent experts and colleagues, mainly technical colleagues with technical expertise, who will help us to discover what's going on with the internet by essentially navigating what happens when we, for example, right now, access Zoom server or send email or download Netflix movie or do other activities on the net. We have with us Olaf Kolkman from the Netherlands. He's the principal of the Internet Society. Avri Doria from the United States, one of the pioneers of the internet infrastructure discussion. Beryl Woodick from Trinidad and Tobago. Beryl is Director of Caribbean Affairs in American Internet Registry. And Vlada Radunovic, Director of Cybersecurity and Diplomacy at DiploFoundation. Before we start this internet journey of internet packets, let us see what is the poll. Has COVID-19 affected your use of the internet? 54% of you answered yes, therefore you have noticed some changes. And we have rest 45, obviously, answers no. Therefore, there is some sort of experience, direct personal experience in changes that are happening. And the major purpose of our discussion today is to see what are those bottlenecks, what are those point of failures in the internet infrastructure that can affect overall internet and our personal experience. And we'll start our journey with Vladimir Radunovic, Vlada. Vlada is joining us from his flat in Zemun. It's a lovely suburb of Belgrade, close to the Danube. He, like you, is sitting behind the notebook, and he will now start this journey by explaining what is happening at his home and what are the first points of connection that he experienced in order, for example, to join today's Zoom discussion. Vlada, over to you.
Thank you, Jovan. Welcome, everyone. We should do the traditional welcome in the online meetings, or traditional greeting. Can you hear me? We should always start with that. And one correction for all of us living in suburbs which have used to be cities on their own. Zemun is a separate city. It's not a suburb of Belgrade. That's my local patriotism. Now, joke aside, a little bit of a context maybe of what's happening in Serbia, because I think it's quite important to understand the context, a social context in which we are currently. So here we have, since maybe a week ago, we have the sort of the full regime of isolation as a mandated. We have police hours in the most of the day, or 12 hours as of 5 p.m. till 5 a.m. Absolutely limited movement to the necessities. And in that context, you really have most of the people being home, right? So in my case, you can see, obviously, the schools are closed, the kindergartens are closed, and we spend most of our time, except for walking the dog, outside for a while at home. So at the moment, what I experienced, and I voted that I experienced some problems with the internet connection in your poll, is basically because of the local connection, because I have kids which are now watching some of the streaming of the school. My wife, which isn't, we discussed it, which is doing a psychotherapy, and she's actually a therapist. That's why she's doing the therapy. Online again, I'm completely online always. It's probably only my dog who is not online these days. So what I had to do as a first instance to protect my right to be connected was actually to connect via the local wire, my computer to my router. You can see the router next to the dog. And that's sort of one way to make sure that I'm better connected, that my own device back home is not going to fail because of the Wi-Fi connections. Now, if my Wi-Fi would be open, probably the neighbors could do the same. So it would be probably clogged, right? So that's one thing. The other thing that's interesting is if you look at if you look at through my window, basically when we were preparing this yesterday, I sent a photo from my window, and I had to change this morning because since yesterday we got about half a meter snow outside, and the storm yesterday was sunny day with 10 degrees. So this is the new picture actually you can see from my window, and there is a cable which goes up from one of these roofs. So the connectivity of the houses there usually still go through these small pieces of cable, which is normal, obviously, but they're not so well driven. There is not much of the fiber to the home, really few, at least in Serbia, and you have a number of houses which are connected on the same cable. Now, the cable itself is not the problem. The problem is, of course, the demand of the people and the way they use it. And if you look at the infrastructure that comes to these houses around myself or this particular cable, there is a number of people that are connected through this one connection. They're sharing the connection. If they start using more and more around through the single connection, they have a limit with their internet service provider. They could, of course, ask the provider to raise the bandwidth. And a number of providers, as I've heard, are considering these options. They do it also in classical times, not only in times of crisis, that they simply they keep the same price, but they raise the bandwidth you can use. And what I'm picking up, the providers are considering this option. Alternative option, and then I'll close with that, for me to connect, and I might do that if my wireless or the broadband clogs, would be the 4G, 3G, the mobile connection, the mobile Wi-Fi in a way, the hotspot. And that seems to be working quite well still. And sometimes I do have to change it in these couple of days. I've had a couple of instances where I had to change to switch to the 3G, 4G connection. That's another good question, to what extent the providers then can support the demand, the increased demand. But we can get back to that, maybe a quick comment at the end. What I've observed in the texts around an analysis that are appearing is that the pattern of use, in most cases, not significantly changed in sense of what people commonly use and the load. There is a huge surge in the use of streaming, obviously, and video gaming, and that is something that could be clogging sometimes the connection. But in most cases, even the video streaming that we use, such as Zoom and the others, it's not 4K video. It's not so demanding. Not even comparing to the high definition streams in 4K that we might be streaming from other places. So probably the only change in the pattern that we are seeing, the biggest one, at least here, is the change in the operation in the hours. right? Most of the people used to be using heavily internet, or the peaks were during the working hours. Now the peaks are still during the working hours, and these peaks in many countries go up to 15-30% above. Yep, go.
Vlad, just one question. Your kids are still young and you can impose some discipline. Are there any practical measures what you can do on the level of your home when it comes to Wi-Fi to at least reduce that bottleneck before we move outside your home towards ISP?
Well, I guess I would cry from all of you 120 people here to give me some tips and tricks what to do with them when they're home. Now my kids are 3 years old, so that's a difference, and I don't put them much online at all, right? So they have very limited use. But I guess the kids that are in the school, and here currently you have a lot of kids which use the online classroom streams and so on. That's a big deal. So I guess some sort of a discipline, that's at least what people discuss. Some sort of psychologically also some sort of a discipline when is what being done, including when the games are played and when the streaming is done, can help the local congestion in my house or in the apartment. But whether that impacts the higher level, as you mentioned, let's move to that in the next step. Johan, back to you.
I can see, Vlada, that your wife is therapist. Now we are moving out of the Vlada's apartment towards internet service provider in Belgrade. And the traffic, we'll see in a few minutes what's happening from the Zemun. It's going to the suburb, another suburb of Belgrade, where is the internet service provider.
So I do want to go back to that question about what can you do at your local level. This is a little bit for the technologists among us, but usually you will have a router in your house, a broadband modem or a DSL modem. That is the little device that connects your network inside of your house to the copper or the fiber. And some of these little boxes will allow you to prioritize the traffic of certain types or the traffic of certain machines. So in my house, my machine has absolute priority over all other traffic at this moment. So sometimes you can do something technical, but that is you need to have the capability and the knowledge to do that.
Thank you, Olaf. Olaf, now we heard this useful tip that we may use in managing family relations in this difficult time. We are now at the internet service provider. And I would like to hear from you and the others, what are we going, this is a building of internet service provider in Belgrade, where the Vlada's traffic, Zoom traffic is landing. In the preparation, we heard that a lot can be done on this local level with internet service provider, internet exchange points. Could you unpack that point on our journey, this second point, internet service provider and the local scene? Please go ahead.
Yeah, you were asking that to me, yeah?
Yes, Olaf, and then Avri and Bevil can join as well.
Yeah, so from the copper wires and the fiber wires, the traffic from Vlada's house will go to some sort of concentrator and then connect to the central backbone of the ISP. So the ISP will have a network, which is its own core network. And one of the bottlenecks that you can see there is actually how many customers there are behind one single link. So there is an aggregation router, as they're called, usually combining, say, the traffic from everybody's from Vlada's village. And putting that on one link into the network where it is further distributed to the other places within the IHP's network. Now those aggregation points are usually close to the customers, and they might suffer capacity problems if everybody is using the same connectivity, if maximum connectivity at the same time. They usually have a certain amount of capacity. usually they're somewhat underutilized, but if everybody uses the internet at the same time, that might be one of the places where there is a bottleneck. So this building, for instance, might be one of those buildings. It might also be the place where the central core network of the ISP is managed. The central core network is where, you know, the traffic that arrives from Vlada's neighborhood is then routed towards a destination inside the network, or to the edge of the network, the appropriate edge of the network, where it connects to another network. Remember that the internet is a network of networks, and it's going to be very confusing when I'm talking about networks. We were talking about Vlada's home network. That's a network. Vlada's home network connects to the internet service provider's network. Inside of the service provider network, there is, you know, network management, and the network provider will the internet service provider will connect yet to other network providers.
Thank you, Olaf. Let me just come on this point. This will be probably the most important stop on our journey. We'll be returning to that. I would like to see if Avri, or Bevil, or Vlada can make some sort of introductory remark on this element of the bottleneck on the, let's say, national level internet service providers. Over. Good. If you don't have so far any comment, we'll get back to this later on. We move to the next step in our journey. We will move from Belgrade to Frankfurt. As you know, Frankfurt is one of the major internet hubs in Europe. It aggregates a lot of traffic from all over the Europe. Approximately 50% of Serbian traffic is going via Hungary, Austria, to Frankfurt. Now, Frankfurt experienced approximately 7% of the rise of the traffic over the last few days. It is huge. That rise is basically the complete traffic of Switzerland, Luxembourg, and Liechtenstein. That just 7%. Now, the next question of our journey to all of our panelists: can we expect some sort of bottleneck on those points, and like Frankfurt? And there are approximately 20 of those points all over the world, including Miami, San Francisco, Singapore, Shanghai, Frankfurt, and those are places where internet concentrates, which creates another vulnerability. But let us now focus on this congestion element. Any comment from our panelists before we move forward on our journey? This is the Equinix, nicely in their servers, the interchange place of a German CIX, and this is where the most of the traffic from Europe lands before it goes in other directions. Over to our panelists.
Can you go back one slide, or to the picture? Yeah. There's something you said that I think is important to clarify. You said the traffic will go to Germany via Hungary and Czechia. Obviously, from a network perspective, those borders don't exist. Your ISP in Belgrade probably has a fiber, or rents a fiber, or uses another ISP that has a fiber that directly connects into the Frankfurt IXPs. And in terms of the traffic, those borders just don't exist. So there is not the case that the packets are handed over to Hungary, and from Hungary to Czechia, and from Czechia to Germany. It is one straight path for the package, just to make sure there is no confusion about that fact.
Sure. Olaf, here we will open the brackets which we may discuss later on. As Olaf indicated, we don't have a internet border police. But there are some challenges, especially for the landlocked country. For example, Nepal, what we read recently, experienced problem in managing their increase of traffic because most of traffic is managed by Indian internet providers. Therefore, we'll have that interplane interaction, which is important for a policy aspect.
Yep, yep.
We are landing in Frankfurt. Olaf, any comment from your side? Should we be worried about the capacity of the Frankfurt exchange point, or Miami, or any other major points?
No, what we know about the Internet Exchange Point, they have seen a significant amount of traffic increases, several terabytes for Frankfurt, but they also have an enormous amount of extra capacity. Factor 9 typically for Frankfurt. Other IXPs also have significant headroom and capacity to absorb more utilization of the networks. The amount of traffic that these networks see extra is very significant, sort of the size of the total amount of traffic of small countries. So it is not very likely that these IXPs become the bottlenecks. They are used to scaling. They can cope with, and they have coped with, simultaneous downloads of new Apple releases or game releases, which are notorious for creating huge peaks in utilization of the networks. IXPs are generally not expected to become a problem.
Thank you. Olaf, any comment from our other presenters, Vlada, Arvin, Bevil, maybe on the question, Bevil, on the question of connection of Caribbean region via Miami to the rest of the internet? Over there, concentration is even higher than in Europe. In Europe, there is a Frankfurt, but there are also other places like Amsterdam, London, and Paris. Bevil? Okay, while we are waiting for Bev, go ahead.
Can I be heard at the moment? This is Aubrey.
Yes, Aubrey, go ahead, please.
Yeah, and what was being said about the internet exchanges is actually very important, because them being able to handle their load, especially the load of what I'm thinking of as fixed content, is actually very important as you move towards the transit and other parts of the network. And in fact, the more that's there, the better the pressure is on you know, the core of the infrastructure. So they're a very key, that an important one to look at. Though indeed they're only able to offer part of the solution, not all of it, and it really depends also on how many of the service providers are willing to connect at those internet service points, at those internet connections. So and willing to peer, and that ends up one of the big issues as you move to the core. So I just wanted to throw that piece in for now, and I wanted to make it could be heard. I didn't turn my video on because I'm having bad bandwidth, though I'll try to turn it on. And my problem is local on cable. All the kids in the neighborhood are at school, and the city of Providence is doing a education home experiment this week for 2 weeks. So all the kids are on the network. So if I have problems, it's probably my local cable that is my main problem. Thanks.
Thank you, Avri. Yes, we are hearing it with a bit of a lag, and thank you for that explanation, which is in vivo example of congestion. Now, Vlada, any comment on Frankfurt and the major internet exchange points?
Yeah, quick one. Looking at the reports coming from the IXPs generally, as Olaf said, they all claim that, particularly the big ones, that they have enough sufficient capacity 10 times than the current peak. So they don't expect any big problems. The major telecoms like French Telecom and the others also report that they have capacities. My worry is not even on the local level. The Serbian IXP just reported that they have invested a lot in the recent years to be prepared for any kind of circumstances like that, and they don't expect the bigger problems. The major telecoms on the national level usually have the same level of professionality. But there are two worries on this side. One is the developing countries which firstly might not have the IXP, though they're more and more having, or majority having IXPs, and the level of investment on their side, like in Nepal, and the Nepalese problem with or envisaged problem because of the lack of investment in regular times. The other one is for developing countries that depend on the others, because Nepal depends largely on India. So the question is, if India goes into a problem or simply wants to lock, then Nepal will have the problem as well. So that's one aspect that maybe it's interesting to look at for developing countries. And the other one is the trend. Currently, we have about 1 billion users worldwide in about 50 countries, which are in one way or another isolated. So that's literally 1/4 of the total amount of internet users in only 50 countries. US has not locked down yet. Some European countries have not locked down yet. New Zealand and then I think Australia. And so they are going to, UK as well, they're going towards isolation. So my worry is to what extent this peak, the global peak and the pressure, even on IXPs, on maybe not Frankfurt, but the other IXPs that might experience, I don't know. And we had the comment from the former FCC chairman of the US regulator, who said, actually Tom Wheeler, who said, we don't know what we can expect. So if you have a former FCC chair who says, we don't know what to expect, we should be worried. Well, we should be cautious. That's the only thing. I don't think we should be worried, but I think we should be cautious and tracking regularly. Back to you.
Thank you, Vlada. Just to open the brackets on 2 points is the position of developing countries, which may not have that robust centers like Frankfurt, and also the question of interplay between policymakers, regulators, and the companies. We heard that Netflix and few companies downgraded the quality of their video after the call from European Commission. And we will come back to those points, interplay between business and governments later on. Now we will move fast forward from Germany to Ireland, and we'll be basically preparing to dive through seabed cables and cross the Atlantic Ocean. At least this was the way how the MyZoom traffic was basically traced to San Jose in California. There is a small Valentia Island in Ireland, where basically this is the photo where quite a few important cables are landing and then going on the seabed and basically crossing the Atlantic Ocean. Now, the question of the undersea cables, which carry almost 90% of global internet traffic, is one of the geopolitical issues. We are not going to discuss it today, but you know that there were quite a few examples of the cutting of the cable near Alexandria in Egypt almost 10 years ago. And we saw on those incidents how dependent we are on those cables, especially not between Europe and the United States, where you have quite high density. But in some other places, all countries are dependent on 1 or 2 cables. This creates certain vulnerability and dependence. Now, Olaf, Avri, Vlada, any comment on the congestion and the cables that are carrying the global internet traffic, as we can see on this map, all over the world? Over to you. If not, we are moving forward.
Well, Jovan, I can quickly, I guess Olaf can probably comment even more, and Avri, but the quick one is, I think this is the least of the problem. The cables that we have, at least talking about the main connections that you show here, the intercontinental connections, they are robust. They're with a huge capacity. I don't think we have a problem there. We might have problems, of course, with those, again, developing countries and the backbone that comes to them. I would be keen to hear on more of the experiences and concerns coming from small islands, for instance, from Caribbean or Pacific islands, and then some tips of Africa, which might not be still well connected. But overall, the global connectivity, I think the cables are not the problem unless we see the intentions of cyber warfare and cutting the cables. Bit of conspiracy theory. I don't.
That is the topic that we'll discuss next week on during discussion on cyber security.
If I can add something on those, I have actually been looking for, and I've not been able to find any actual data on the percentage utilization of the cables. But from everything I've seen historically, there should be more than enough bandwidth there, and bandwidth is actually not the problem that you're going to see at either the cables or even at the main transit routers. That bandwidth is not their issue, even when they're running now, at their higher rates, and they're running in sort of the reserve bandwidth that they keep for New Year's Eve and other events. While they're running at those higher rates, 10 to 20% higher bandwidth, usage than normal, that's well within most of their capabilities. So I don't think that is where, and then just to repeat what Vlada was saying, I don't think that's where we'll find issues. We will find latency issues, and I want to talk about that later in the system. But in terms of bandwidth, that doesn't seem to be an issue at the moment. Thanks.
Thank you, Avri. Let us now, while we're still floating somewhere or diving in the Atlantic Ocean, hear from Adriana comments from the chat. The chat is conducted in two spaces, here in Zoom space and also on the Facebook. Adriana, what is going on in the text chat rooms?
Hello, everyone. William, thank you for the floor. The chat has been pretty active. In the beginning, we have heard some experiences from our participants from their own countries. So we heard that the Egyptian Ministry of ICT increased the data of 20% for free, that the internet cost is not low in Benin, that in Sri Lanka, the telecom provided an extension to pay the bills, and that there are currently no disruptions in Bulgaria. Some participants also said that the internet is not ready to face the challenges of COVID and that netiquette is needed. Sylvia warned us that there is an increase in cybercrime and that we should be aware of scams and fake news and hackers. Also, on the topic of lag and shutdowns, it was pointed out that it could be the congestion of the ISP, but on the other hand, that it also could originate from the application. At this point, we have two questions, unless I missed something in the last minute or two. Bikiani asked us to please discuss the implication of current situation for Pakistan, and Gabriela Casola asked us, do LDCs and SIDCs have even more vulnerability in terms of internet infrastructure? That is all for now.
Thank you, Adriana, and thank you for the summary of the comments in these two questions. I will obviously open the floor for our panelists, but I don't know how specifically we can discuss the question of Pakistan. And Gabriela, your question is extremely pertinent. Usually the small island states and the least developed countries are very often the weakest link in any type of crisis. Environmental, human crisis, and the health crisis, and I would say digital crisis. Therefore, there is a need to do a lot, and we plan another webinar focusing specifically for those most vulnerable countries and territories and communities for the next week. And it is very high on our radar on background research at Digital Watch that we have been doing. Now we'll move fast forward to the next step on our journey, and then we will get back to quite a few questions that already appeared in our discussion and comments by panelists. We are now landing probably somewhere close to you, Avri, at Long Island or New Jersey, and this is Brookhaven. I guess it is at the Long Island. And you can just plug your computer to our fiber optic and moving to San Jose. Now, this map is simplified. Most likely, there will be some server farms closer to Long Island, or even somewhere in Europe. There are so-called content delivery networks and fiber optic cables. established by major companies like Facebook, Google, and there is some estimate that approximately 40% of traffic is moving from the regular telecom operators towards content delivery networks. Therefore, this map in reality won't be this straight, and it will take many turns arriving to San Jose, to the Zoom company over the server hosted by Zoom. We can see those are typical server farms. And here we can discuss another issue, the question of role of application. One of the comments read by Andriana is that applications and the way how applications are structured can create also the more demand for bandwidth. This is one of the major server farms, and we are ending our journey at Zoom in San Jose. Most likely the servers are not hosted there, they are somewhere in the vicinity. After today's session, you will receive the tools and indications how you can check yourself exact path from your computer to, let's say, Zoom or Facebook or Google, where it will end, maybe somewhere closer to you if there are content delivery networks, or going all the way to, in this case, to Zoom. Therefore, this was our journey from Vlada's Flats via internet service provider in Belgrade, via Hungary, Austria to Frankfurt, the major internet hub in Europe, then towards Ireland, undersea cables, which landed in Long Island, through the United States, to the server, which provides, in this case, Zoom application that we use for today's webinar. And that's the whole journey. Now, at the end of this journey, we would like to pose another poll before we open the floor for discussion and comments by our panelists and all of you in the text chat. Now, the question in this poll is, we have to relaunch poll 2, is basically to see in your view, what are the main bottlenecks and points of failure on the internet? Please select 3. Home Wi-Fi system, internet service providers, national internet exchanges, major internet hubs, Frankfurt, Miami, Singapore, seabed cables, or cloud servers where applications like Zoom are hosted. We will leave it for a few minutes. In the meantime, we will hear the first reflections from our panelists on this journey from Belgrade to San Jose. Over to you, Avri, Olaf, and Vlada.
This is Avri. I just wanted to bring up one difference in kinds of traffic, and this is something that's being seen. Molly, we're talking about content, and content, as you indicated, the cloud providers, Netflix, they're all very good at staging their content wholly closer to the users, and they're doing a very good job of that. The other kind of content, or the other kind of traffic that's a lot of pressure on is things like VPN traffic, where everybody, as they start to work at home, is basically logging in to their home office from around the world. So that kind of traffic doesn't get staged anywhere, but basically has to go through the whole network to the other side of the world. Same thing with, a lot of Skype calls and everything else. And while the bandwidth is there for those, all of the various latencies, no matter which those people pick. By the way, it said pick 3, but they let me pick 1. But a lot of the latency that gets introduced there basically increases as you move through the network, creating the problems that we perceive. And if latency gets too big, then you get the problem. You lose your connection and whatever. But those two kinds of traffic are actually very different, have different problems that need to be solved. And as I said, from everything I could see looking through, and I'm not an operator, so, you know, everything I say is secondhand, but looking through the operators' chat list and their email list, is the bandwidth isn't their problem, but some of the latency issues, some of, I said, ring issues, some of the authentication issues do get involved. And where we see a lot of congestion is at particular servers. When servers aren't multiplied, when there aren't multiple ones dealing with load, very often a single server can have its own problems and such. So I just wanted to sort of say we have to look at the kinds of traffic.
Thank you, Avri. I can just report from this survey. By mistake, it was indicated 3. I think there was. You picked up one of the reason internet service providers are the leaders in potential troublemaking on our journey, followed by home Wi-Fi system. It's interesting. It's more than I expected, and then national internet exchanges, and then we have more or less cloud servers, seabed cables, and major internet hubs. Therefore, there is a lot of trust in major internet hubs in Frankfurt, Miami, Singapore, and other major places. Olaf, comment from you on about journey and about this poll. Does it reflect your technical expertise that the major potential problem is with ISPs? Over to you.
I find that very hard to answer. This is obviously a perception. But what we can learn from this poll alone already is that there are many places in the internet infrastructure that are more or less operated independently from each other. Your home network is operated independently from the major hubs, from the internet exchange points nationally, and from all the networks that carry the traffic. Getting a deep and good understanding of where the bottlenecks are requires measurements of these individual actors. And simple answers here are just very hard to get, perhaps even impossible. For me, that makes some of the moves and recommendations that have been made a little bit awkward at times, because they are not really data-driven. I do think, indeed, that the internet service providers might be a major part where bottlenecks occur, specifically in places where there has been underinvestment. It is really, what we are facing in general, even without this crisis, is connecting the next billions and the last billions. And we can only do that by making internet affordable and available. And in the places where we have failed to do that, and some of the developing countries, unfortunately, are in that spot, the problems that we see today are basically, putting a lens on the problems that were already there. They are just much more visible. In places where there is underinvestment, where people have not taken care of increasing capacity, of making plans, forward plans, and so on and so forth, you will see the issues. Also in the developing nations. So yeah, I hope that sort of answers your question.
Good. I'm not sure that answers, and I understand, but if you're asked by government regulator who is seeing the sort of panic with internet access, we may get back later on to that question. What would be their response to them? And now we will shift gradually to this type of discussion. Mm-hmm. What is essentially, maybe Vlada, you can make a few comments. What is the interplay between us as users, businesses, tech platform, and companies that provide services, and governments and regulators, people who are charged to protect public interest and ensure that critical infrastructure functions. And internet is currently critical infrastructure of societies worldwide. Vlado, what is this interplay between these three actors? Olaf raised some question, Avri as well. Could you shed us more light on that aspect?
Yeah, it's interesting to observe that firstly that we are organizing this discussion. So these discussions are starting, and they are starting as a part of the concern by the citizens as well, because they tend to see, as our poll also said, some problems. So they're worried. They tend to understand that there might be some congestion. But on the other hand, as well, as the initiative of the technical community and even the governments or the regulators. So that's a comforting thing, that we see more and more regulators, IXPs, telecoms actually giving statistics or monitoring what's happening and being open, transparent on what's happening. To what extent they're honest, but I understand they are. And it's measurable. I mean, those things are measurable these days. They're opening up, they're trying to monitor, and then the regulators are setting up the initiatives. And you can see, for instance, the BEREC, the European body of regulatory authorities of telecommunications, is setting up a special mechanism for reporting the national authorities on what is the level in the networks. The ITU has just initiated its own sort of initiative. I have to look for the name, which actually is inviting countries to share their views on what's happening what are the problems. It's called, I don't know, there is a name, I'll find it. But anyhow, they already have, on their website, they already have reports from Pakistan, from Singapore, the actions being done by regulators in South Africa, the FCC, which has set up in US the Keep Americans Connected pledge. And there are many of these pledges and in a way cooperation. And to give another example, and maybe to close with that at the moment, is this cooperation between mainly, the EU, but not only the EU, and the content providers, where you have seen Netflix quality content providers, in a way, Netflix, YouTube, and the others, who agreed to put down the streaming level, the streaming quality, so to avoid the congestion within this at least problematic weeks. Of course, the users can put down the streaming quality on their side as well, and they should be doing that. And we need more awareness on that side, as we had discussion in the chat, that we need solidarity, even if it doesn't hurt you, even if your connection works, maybe your neighbors or the neighboring country doesn't, because you consume more. So we need to just be smart, but I'm quite optimistic in that sense that we already started discussing and finding the solution jointly. I'm quite happy as it goes, but back to you.
Okay, one question, Vlada, before we ask Pri to comment. There was a question request. You mentioned the question of transparency. And I'll get back to one comment which Avri made previously, that we often do not know what is the level of traffic. And there is a question of transparency of the volume, type of travel, arrangement, especially on the top tier, the highest tier of the providers, which are exchanging traffic through the barter, mainly through barter arrangements. One of the major question of the internet infrastructure is lack of transparency, lack of data, what's going on. So far, it has been working very well, and there is an argument, don't ask questions, don't fix it if it is not broken. But I would say that this discussion will open the question of overall transparency. What's going on? How our traffic is exchanged? What are the points? And it also brings the question of privacy, data protection, and other issues. We had a request from Pri to talk, and I don't know if he or she is ready. If not, we get back again to Olaf to comment on this interplay. And Avri, are you as optimistic as Vlada that Corona can bring us some reasonable partnership between us as users or consumers, tech companies or providers of internet services, and governments? Over to you. Avri. Oh, we have a...
Oh, you got it now, so I'll mute.
Okay, we have a Pri, and then Avri will talk. Pri, go ahead.
In Sri Lanka, the problem with the ISPs is that they have given too many connections, and sometimes we find that the bandwidth is low and there are like connectivity issues. So that's what I wanted to highlight.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Priyanti. Therefore, the question of basic connectivity remains a highly important issue. Vlada raised it in this comment, and we'll have dedicated a webinar to those aspects. Thank you for bringing this question. Avri, over to you.
Sure, and I'm gonna thank you, and I'm gonna look at a couple things. One is I'm gonna go back to talking about buttons for a second, because talk about the connected. We used to talk about.
Avri, could I just ask why we like your outfit? You may switch off the video and use just the sound. In the meantime, we hear from Olaf his comments, and we'll get back to Avri. Okay. Olaf.
Yeah, I wanted to get hard to say. The question was, what is the interplay between government, businesses, and consumers and other stakeholders? Let's put two things at the forefront. First, the internet as is already a very transparent infrastructure. The way that our connections are made have been measured for years and years and years by institutions like CAIDA of the University of Southern California. Internet measurements at scale are happening. I have to say they're fairly underfunded. There are other initiatives to measure the quality of the internet as well, the RIPE Atlas platform. So as such, the internet as a network of networks can be transparently measured. I think we have to crank up the efforts. I hope that CAIDA will bring interest and funding to the academic sector and the technical community that does this work. With regards to capacity, the amount of headroom, the utilization, that is something where a transparency is probably not possible for the public at large because it's business sensitive data. But this is something where perhaps regulators can set fairly harsh requirements. On the other hand, I have to say the internet has so far, with fairly minimal problems, been able to absorb the changes in this traffic and cope with it. And in that sense, we have to look at the internet, at least so far, as a success. The fact that people can scale up very rapidly in cloud infrastructures and so on and so forth, I would say is a success. Going back to the applications, applications like Zoom, like Microsoft Teams, like Google, but probably also smaller vendors of this stuff have been able to scale up very, very rapidly.
Thank you.
So
Thank
yeah.
you. Just one question, if I get and then we'll provide follow-up comments. Obviously, measuring internet is technically possible, but very often commercially not feasible for whatever reasons. Therefore, that was a point of the lack of transparency, and it would be interesting to explore that possibility of regulators requesting from operators more transparency on the traffic, because internet is engineering artifact and it should be the most measurable one. But the fact is that we don't have that much information about what's going on the network for commercial, not for technical needs. Therefore, it's very important distinction, and thank you for bringing that important distinction. Before we move to Andriana for questions from the audience, let's see if connection with Avri is better. Avri, over to you.
Is it better? Can I be better?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. A couple of things I wanted to mention about cooperation between companies and government. And you could see it in a couple places. In Providence, for example, where many of the children got their connectivity through school and libraries, but now they're home and being schooled from home, it was necessary for the city and state to request that the providers make free bandwidth to the home available to all of the city's students. And within a week, they pretty much did so. We had the first day of classes yesterday, and they went well. There was enough bandwidth. A lot of people are getting 30 to 120 days free network connection. So that's one local level at which, because even within countries like U.S., where you say, you know, maybe 90% of the people can have network access, only, you know, 50, 60% have it at home. And as we start to be homebound and home confined, that pressure will grow, and that pressure will require a certain amount of flexibility. I very much agree with Ola that there is the flexibility there. There is the bandwidth, and the engineers are working really hard to keep it working. Remember, though, they're people too. As this thing continues, if it's a week, 2 weeks, a month, 3 months, we will start to see certain pressures of the people that maintain the network staying healthy, the equipment staying healthy and needing to be replaced because manufacturing is not there. So also when we look at these issues, we have to take both the short term. Can we now, with what's in place, the network's good and it can handle it? We're flexible enough. As time goes on, are we ready for the various slow degradation facts that we might have facts in the world? Thanks.
Avri, thank you for bringing this time component. We are now in sort of adrenaline phase, reacting to the immediate situation, but it is very likely that it will continue. And your point is extremely pertinent, that we have to see how to maintain this structure. Now we are going to Andriana for comments from our text chat and the questions, and then I will ask our panelists to give us one advice what we should do to deal with this problem. As a good, well, trying to be good moderator, it's typical question at the end of any session. Andriana, over to you.
Thank you for giving me the floor again, Jovan. The chat has again been very active. The concern of the high cost of personal connectivity and poor quality of service is an issue for many users in many developing countries. That's what the participants agreed on. And Jorge underlines the end-to-end resiliency, which includes the end users in the broadest sense. And then the discussion turned to online education when Noha underlined that many students don't have personal PCs or proper connection, to which other participants responded with some very interesting comments. For example, Jorge underlined that the Ministry of Public Education in Costa Rica has developed over 200 models for teachers, parents, and students, but that infrastructure, connectivity, and digital literacy still remain an issue in the country. Lolke pointed out that in the Netherlands, a lot of initiatives have started to give laptops for free to people who cannot afford them, and also to give internet access to those that do not have it. However, Silvio noted that in Italy, there is a problem with access, as in the ISPs take care of connecting the last mile, but they don't fix the old network, and therefore the network situation is mixed because nobody has homogeneous network conditions. Caroline works in Djibouti, and she noted that there, the telecoms are a monopoly, so everything from cost of availability and accessibility is supply driven, which means that it cuts off the poorest of the poor. And then the most interesting example, which raised the most interest in the chat, was from Hannah. Now, Hannah is based in South Carolina, and she also noted that this is also happening in Illinois. So schools are deploying Wi-Fi buses to try to bring connectivity to students, as well as using repeaters to make sure that students and families can access the school Wi-Fi networks from their cars in the parking lot. I have two questions for the very end. Atef Ahmed asked, what about the people who live in remote areas and don't have internet access and are informed by governments to stay home as a result of COVID-19? And Pierre Horna asked, can we perhaps have concrete tips about what to do in order to avoid the disruption of the internet in this time of crisis? That's all from me.
Thank you, Andriana, and for all of you for having such an interesting discussion. The second question will include in the sort of comments from our panelists, but the remote areas question is extremely important. They can also reflect in their comments. I'll just bring one example where Kenyan governments made a partnership with the Google Balloons project to provide access in the remote areas in Kenya. And I think they are basically implementing that project. I think Barak and a few other colleagues from Kenya are familiar with this. I would like now to invite, in this order, first Vlada, then Avri, and Olaf, to give us one advice and maybe to comment on this last question that we received. Vlada, over to you.
Well, maybe two levels. One is on the user level. I think regardless of whether we are experiencing problems already or we might, I think it makes sense, as in the other aspects of our lives today, is to be solidary and to think about the others. So, and there are a couple of initiatives, including in Serbia, there is a Share Foundation, sort of a leaflet which says, let's save the internet, and they suggest stream less, turn off the autoplay of the music, turn on the data savers, use binge the audio podcasts, download during the evening or the night hours when the load is less, play single player games and with in vivo rather than online, and get some rest from endless scrolling and browsing. So these sort of smart thinking and smart use is one suggestion. To the limited extent, we shouldn't be worried. We should be just cautious and solidary. But the other more strategic suggestion would be we should think a step ahead. And that means particularly what Avri said in the terms of this crisis and in the terms of the massivity of this crisis once the other countries, God forbid, go offline as well, or go in isolation as well, like US and the others. But I would particularly put the emphasis on Africa and Asia. Again, God forbid for these things to really get massive in Africa, but there the infrastructure will be under huge stress. And I guess now is time to think about what to do and how to prevent this happening in Africa when it comes to the broadband. Maybe the ITU platform and some other can be a politically driven one, but it should be acted now. Back to you.
Thank you, Vlada. Avri, your advice, what we can do?
Okay, a few things. First of all, there's lots of things, as Vlada said, that we can do. Whether people will do them or not is a good question, because solidarity is only appealing to small parts of the population. I've already seen the discussions on, why should we? Paid for Netflix. I should get my full bandwidth. And so solidarity only will go too far. If I was going to ask anything, I'd say stop gambling and using porn on the net, and just relating those two activities. But do we think that would happen? So I really don't know. I do think the network can sustain it. I do think it's flexible enough, and that where it exists, the problems for those that are rural and don't have the connectivity is a harder problem that's going to take more creativity than a last-minute comment can cope with. That's about it. Thanks.
Thank you, Avri. Olaf, your concluding advice, and then we'll wrap up discussion. We are still just a few minutes beyond the estimated time of 1 hour. Olaf, over to you.
Yeah, I want to keep this short. It is indeed the case that in the most vulnerable areas in the world, the impact will be high, and that is very unfortunate. I am not sure if we can collectively build out infrastructure that is needed. That is already very difficult in non-stressful times. As you know, the Internet Society has always had an interest in helping people to get access to the Internet. We've been helping with building IXPs. We've been helping people with setting up their own community networks to connect. Maybe this is a way for people to start collaborating on these type of initiatives. On the other hand, I would rather have them stay inside and safe. So if I have a concrete tip, I would say keep using the net, because that's a way to stay safe and healthy in these troubled times, and show some self-restraint. Yes.
Thank you, Olaf. A special thanks to our panelists, to Avri, Vlada, and Olaf, for bringing us on this journey. To Andriana, Natasha, Arvin, and our remote participation team for a great work in preparation for this session. And I will conclude with just a few follow-up points. After this session, you will receive follow-up report. Therefore, you will get links to the issues, applications, tools that we mentioned in our discussion. For example, you can trace route from your computer by using some of those applications. You can also visit an excellent survey by Share Foundation, which basically followed this route from Belgrade to the United States in an excellently designed survey of the day in the life of one internet packet. We will be running a few more webinars. Next Thursday, we have a webinar on technology and human rights in time of crisis. Next week, we have a webinar on cybersecurity, and we are starting online course on online meetings. Diplo started Conference Tech Lab, which you can use for assistance in organizing and running online meetings, webinars, courses, and other activities. And we are also conceptualizing discussion around the question of day after the end of the coronavirus crisis. This is an interesting issue. How the world will look at day after in terms of technology, politics, human relations, and many diplomacy and many aspects of society. Therefore, stay tuned, keep in touch. We'll keep you updated about the next activities. And once more, thank you for your great contribution, ideas. Have a nice day, afternoon, or evening. Bye-bye from Geneva.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye. Stay safe.